Very pleased to be joined today by Barry Hurewitz, who is has an amazing track record in the financial field with startups, lots of different things. He's a man of many talents, and he is a relatively newly minted advisor here with Enquire AI. We're very happy to have his perspective on the board and very happy for him to be joined with us today. So wanted to throw it over to you, Barry, to introduce yourself properly, but thank you for joining us today.
Sure, it's my pleasure to be here. I'm thrilled to be a new advisor to Enquire AI. I think the platform is extraordinary. I've enjoyed all of my time with the team and with Cenk. In terms of my background, I've spent the majority of my career in financial services, specifically around investment research, and then later on, more of my time was spent in analytics. And then I transitioned into the wealth business as well. So I've had an opportunity to see a variety of different sub-industries within the financial services space, and I think it's prepared me well for my future services with Enquire AI.
All right, so Barry, if you wouldn't mind, can you walk us through a little bit about your background and really the pathway that you took to get here? Because obviously you graduated top 5% at Harvard Business School. You've had the opportunity to work for really large corporations, Time Warner, McKinsey, and also some really fun, innovative startups within companies as well as outside of companies. So, what's your perspective on innovation and how has it all sort of come together for you to be in the role that you're in now?
Yeah, I've had a pretty eclectic background, and I think that has served me well because many times innovation is taking ideas and solutions to problems that exist in other industries and apply them in new settings to new problems. So you're right. I began my career at McKinsey, and once I left business school, McKinsey, I got to see a whole variety of different industries. And then when I left McKinsey and joined Time Warner, I was in the media industry. And that would seem like that's distant from financial services. But I spent the bulk of my career in the investment research area, which to me was a little bit of a cross between consulting, in terms of what the analysts do, a little bit of a cross between consulting and a media company, because they're obviously writing a lot of reports and producing a lot of content. And so I was able to take for my playbook from the media industry and apply it in the investment research context. And that helped me come up with approaches that were very different than what my competition was doing. So once I left McKinsey, I joined Morgan Stanley. I initially was global marketing head, and then very quickly moved from global head of marketing to global COO. Then from global COO of Morgan Stanley, I then transitioned to become global COO for UBS. While I was at UBS, I built an analytics group called Evidence Lab Innovations. We took Evidence Lab Innovations, we spun that out. We then moved that to serve other parts of the firm as well, not just our clients. And then I was able to spend time in the wealth business. But the fact that I was able to move from consulting, and that was everything from consumer packaged goods to the aerospace industry to media, then to investment research, then to wealth, and serve a whole bunch of different types of businesses, that allowed me to pull ideas and concepts from many different places that I could bring to bear for new problems.
And when you were doing that, did you find that there was a lot of relevance across all of these sort of seemingly unrelated situations and applications of different things? Do you find that innovation transfers pretty well?
Yeah, the things that people think are most innovative, on the surface, the ideas look foreign. But many times, if you scratch below the surface, the problems underneath, where one idea is used in one industry, the problem's identical to the problem being, that an industry is grappling with. So if you can see below the surface, below that substructure, and see how that problem is analogous, you can pull really interesting ideas. So, one of the problems that I was facing when I was global COO of research was to come up with pricing models. Because I spent time at Time Warner and I was in a new business ventures group trying to price new content, it was very easy for me to see how what the analysts were doing and how to price not just their written research, but their live time, because a lot of what people are paying for when you are accessing sell-side research is time with the analyst. And I was able to see that actually time with the analyst is scarce and there's only so much that you can give away. I made a connection between that time and the time that you'd have with a recording artist, because when you go to a concert, there's a finite amount of people that can go to a concert, and it's, you want to experience it live, you want to be there, just like you want a conversation with an analyst. The pricing models for how you might go about pricing access to a concert were very analogous to the types of pricing models that I might use when I'm trying to price sell-side research. And I was able to draw upon those concepts when I was back at Morgan Stanley, and some of the very first pricing models were connected to my experience from Time Warner. If that makes sense.
That's fascinating. So I'll be the first to admit I'm much more of a marketing guy than a finance guy, so I probably connect with you better on that level. But for those unfamiliar, could you explain some of the fundamental differences between buy-side and sell-side analysis, and how their perspectives might differ within the financial ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, the term sell-side and buy-side is confusing. Essentially, the buy side, the way I think about it, they're buying services from a broker, and the broker is selling those services. So a sell-side analyst is many times trying to help clients make a trade, because if you go back in time, investors were using brokers to match trades. Now it happens in a much more complex ecosystem. We won't get into that for for this particular conversation. But in order to help facilitate the trade, they were providing research and other services to help them, make good decisions, and that became part of the sell side offering. And you can just think of sell side as synonymous with brokerage. Today, there are boutiques and a whole bunch of other people in the within the research ecosystem that maybe people might define as part of the sell side. But I think it's just easiest to just think of the sell side are people that are not actually making the trade, but they are providing investment research, advice, expertise to investors, which would be called the buy side. If that's helpful.
That's really helpful. And so one of the things that is probably true about being an analyst in the modern financial ecosystem is that there's no shortage of information. So what are some of the challenges that analysts might face in sorting that information, getting that information obviously faster than competitors, things like that? What does that look like for the modern financial analyst?
Yeah, I mean, when you say there's no shortage of information, I mean, that is an understatement, the biggest understatement that I've heard in a long time. I mean, analysts are drowning in information. There is way too much information. And so the number one thing that an analyst needs to do is be very focused and disciplined in how they go about collecting information and how they go about consuming content. Because, we just talked about earlier that clients want access to their time. The time is finite, but they also need to use their time to produce content. And, that content is trying to draw an investment conclusion. And when you are overwhelmed with information out there, then it's very important to focus on what really matters. So in sell-side research, and it's also true on buy-side, investors in general, anyone that wants to come to an investment conclusion, they need to understand what are the debates that are on the active minds of the investors on a given security, because that's ultimately what's going to drive the price. So it's not the data that people collect. It's not information that's out there. It's how are active investors consuming that information, what conclusions are they coming to, and what decisions will they make. So you need to start with what are those controversies, what are those debates, what are those questions, uncertainties that are on their minds. And when you realize what they are, then only then can a sell-side analyst decide what questions that they want to analyze and go after. That is going to drive what information to collect. If you're an analyst and you're undisciplined and you collect a lot of information that is interesting but not relevant to the debate, then what ultimately is going to happen is you're going to squander your time and you're not going to be able to do as deep research as you might want to, and therefore you'll be less relevant. There's a few ways to be different as a sell-side analyst. You can try to collect information on a debate that matters that other people don't have. That's getting harder and harder to do. Unless you are going to create original data that no one else has. Like an example would be if you did a market research study and you did a survey of experts and you were using that and yes, there are other surveys, but only your surveys have your questions in it. And if you frame those questions in a better way, you start to have proprietary information that other people may not have and your clients, the other investors, may want to see. But that's getting harder to do, and you have to use resources to help you do that. The other way to do it is you have the same information other people have, but you analyze it better. Maybe you have pricing data, but you have resources that are data scientists or econometricians, and you're able to build different types of models that are able to tease out how pricing, are able to tease out, let's say, pricing elasticity or something like that. So you can have your own original data, you can analyze it better, or in some cases, the third way is you have the same information other people have, you analyze it in a similar way to other people, you just have better judgment. And the world is filled with a lot of smart people. It gets very hard to have expert judgment that is better than other people. But at the end of the day, to be successful at investing, you have to calibrate all of the information that you're able to consume and try to understand the risk-reward opportunity, and over time make better, let's call them bets, compared to other people with the information that you have.
That's great. No certainty in analysis or investing of any kind. So, I'm curious, since you've gotten to know the Enquire AI platform, what has been your experience? Do you think that it helps most on the efficiency side, the unique insights side, or even just, perhaps it's more in the third column of making you more confident in the decision making that you can make?
Yeah, I think that, whether it's investing or whether it's making a decision in general, it depends on where you are in the learning curve. There are situations where there's something new that's entering the debate that you're completely unfamiliar with. Let's say if you go back 18 months ago, for most people, they were unfamiliar with large language models. And maybe they heard hype and they didn't have access to ChatGPT at that time, but they just knew it was big and people were excited about it. In the beginning, when there's a lot of people that, or even let's just speak for yourself. In the beginning, when you're not knowledgeable about a topic and you're just getting started, the way people learn is they need a framework. They need some type of scaffolding to make sense of the world that is very simple, that they can then organize other information. Because if you're given a lot of detailed information, you don't know what to do with it. It's very hard for your mind to organize it. And human beings, unfortunately, have limited bandwidth in how much information they can hold at any one time. So we tend to group and cluster information. So in the beginning, you need that basic scaffolding where you can organize information. This is where Enquire AI, when you have something like the large language model that's embedded in the offering, and if you're very early on, you can use that to start to build a framework if you prompt it properly to help figure out what matters and how to organize information. Then what you're able to do, once you kind of have that basic scaffolding, you're able to realize where are the gaps in your understanding, and you can interrogate the tool to start building out and filling in more information. But now there's limitations as to how far you can get with the content that any large language model is distilling from publicly available information, and now you want to go deeper. And at this point, maybe you don't know enough where you want to invest a lot of money or time talking to individual experts, but you do have very specific, multifaceted, more complex questions that you could send out using the network pulse and reach a half a dozen experts efficiently and inexpensively, and start getting half-page answers to your questions back. In some cases, I've gotten stuff back within 15, 20 minutes. I mean, it's that fast. Within several hours, you could have all half dozen. Within a day, you definitely will have all half dozen. You can then start to go through those, and Enquire does something really smart, which is it's using its large language model to synthesize and distill those responses for you. But you can use the distilled version, or you can start to go through the actual prompts. And then if you decide you want to talk to these experts, you're now ready for that. You can start to ask much better questions than you would have if you went from the very beginning, find me an expert, get them on the phone, but you really don't know what to ask. The first parts of the learning process really should be get your scaffolding, start to organize information so that you're at a point where you can ask very detailed, much better questions with an expert and use both your time and your resources, your money, your budget much more effectively. And I think that's something that Enquire uniquely does, because I've used a lot of expert networks over the years, and most of the other expert networks, the choice is you can talk to an expert or you can talk to an expert. They might offer you something where you can have a consultant do the interviewing for you and distill, and it's almost like a project. That can be very expensive. They might allow you to do some types of market research, but it tends to be slower, more traditional in the format of that type of market research, and it's much more costly. And I think that Enquire AI is very unique in having this continuum that follows the learning process and meets the learner where they are. Because whether you're an investor, a consultant, a business person making a decision, at the end of the day, you're trying to learn something and get up to speed and be in a position where you have enough understanding to pull the trigger on that decision.
That's excellent. I'm just making a mental note of the topics that you're ticking off. Those are great. Okay. Make sure I don't miss anything. One question I do want to ask you before we move on from just the Gen AI transition that people made about 18 months ago. Where do you feel like generative AI fits into the long term, or even the midterm? Because I don't know if anyone knows the long term, but the midterm future of investment research analysis. Is that something that is here to stay and that will continue to grow? Where do you think the balance of power will end up being between technology and human judgment on that?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about investing, and this has been true, if you go all the way back to when investing first began, and you can argue, I think the first stock exchange was in Copenhagen, Denmark. So I don't know, it's 500-600 years ago, right? But whether it was the Dutch, it doesn't really matter. Wherever that first stock exchange was, or you can even go before it was stock, the Dutch India. The East India Dutch company, or whatever it was. You can go back to these time periods where people want to make an investment, and many times it always follows the same process, where there are market participants that are all trying to decide on the value of a security, and they have these uncertainties that are on their minds, and they're trying to understand if something is mispriced. And when it comes to a security, many times the only way to know if something is mispriced, you have to understand what is it that the other investors in that security believe. Because if you don't know what their beliefs are, then you don't know if you believe something different and if they're missing something. And so I think that the way that that's been done, if you're an investor, many times you can't talk to a sufficient number of other investors that are just like you. You're relying on the sell side, who is talking to all the investors. Even if you don't love the sell side analysts that you use, you still are in many ways dependent on them to understand what are the uncertainties and questions on the minds of the other investors, so you can start to understand that what is it that's driving the stock, and what is it that they believe, and do I believe something different, and what evidence do they have, what evidence do I have, how are they analyzing it? How am I analyzing it? And what's the probability that the conclusion that I'm drawing is more likely to turn out to be right than the probability of the beliefs that they have turning out to be right? And it's always been around a narrative. And so the starting point for investing many times, at least for kind of your traditional long-term investor, is they will oftentimes start with investment research and with dialogues with investment research to understand what the market is thinking, to start to calibrate that. And typically it's not just one narrative. There might be a bull case narrative that's out there where people are more positive in the stock. There might be people who are more negative and they have a set of beliefs and there's a narrative around that. And you're relying on talking to a sufficient number of sell-side analysts to unpack all of that. When you think about a large language model, the ability to distill a lot of content in a way that investors have never been able to do before, it's game-changing. Because an investor today might talk to 5, 7, 10 different analysts on a given security because they have limited time, and they're trying to figure out, what is that upside, downside kind of expected case. But you might have 70, 80 analysts that are covering NVIDIA. I was talking to somebody today that was talking about Apple. Maybe there's 100 analysts covering Apple. It would be impossible to read research on 100 analysts and distill all of that. It would be very difficult to separate all the different views and try to understand what evidence they're looking at and what are the upcoming signposts and catalysts that they're focused on, and just try to understand and distill all the different potential debates and how much is shared across investors and where do investors differ on the margin. We now have tools that can disaggregate a lot of that type of information in a way that was just not possible to do as a human being. You used to have portals, well, you still have them, like a Bloomberg, like a FactSet, where you go and you search for content, but then at the end of the day, you're pulling down the reports and then you're having conversations with individuals. Today, or in the future, I think what you're going to see is these large language models will disaggregate a lot of this information and synthesize and distill this information and allow you to interrogate this information ahead of time so that you can choose which analyst you want to talk to and have much better, richer conversations with a wider variety of analysts than ever before. I don't think that the analyst goes away. That is not the future that I see. I think that the analyst will still be central to understanding beliefs because at the end of the day, you're going to want to talk to an analyst to assess, their conviction, their confidence, to get a lot of other information that just happens naturally through a conversation. But I think the preparation for the conversations with the analysts and the selection process of which analyst you want to talk to is going to change forever. I also think that in addition to understanding the market narratives, you also have to understand the industry context. There's a set of just baseline information that you need to get up to speed with. And I think this is where, using these types of tools in connection with an expert network so that you can access expertise, distill expertise that's hidden and trapped in people's heads in some cases. Sometimes it's hidden and trapped in documents. So before, you might have to go and use Google and try to do certain searches or Bloomberg and search throughout Bloomberg, and you're trying to find content. But at the end of the day, you only have so much time that you can read and consume that content. Now you have something sitting on top of it that will help synthesize and distill that information for you and give you exactly what you need for the prompts that you give it. And then it will help you identify the individuals so that then you can have more intelligent conversations if you're ready for that, or very efficient ways to gather more deeper, customized insights for the questions you have by using something like a network pulse. And these tools are something that are invaluable, and they just didn't exist 12 months ago. And I think we're going to see more tools emerge over the next 12 months that will take large language models that sit on top of publicly available information that are going to sit on more narrower pools of content to allow you to interrogate that in very specific ways. And I think in some ways, it's never been better to be an analyst. And in some ways, it's never been worse to be an analyst or an investor because you're really going to have to learn new skills. You're going to need access to new tools. I don't think you're going to change the core fundamentals of what you're doing, but the way that you go about doing this, it's going to be no different than if you were a chemist using a slide rule and the first calculators came out and then the first computers came out. It changes what scientists did forever. I think this is a very big deal because investing is inherently a narrative business. And getting information, collecting information. It's a distillation and synthesis business, and a lot of stuff is done through a combination of just trying to organize and make sense of an overwhelming amount of information and create a framework that works for you, that helps you understand the risk-reward possibilities of different future scenarios. And I think these tools are going to help you do that with experts. They're going to help you do that with the corporates by being able to distill and synthesize a lot more information that's locked in transcripts. It's going to help you do this with Sellside research, patent libraries. There's all sorts of things, depending on what the questions are that you need information and answers to. I think this is a game changer.
I think that's excellent. And you talk about the narrative that needs to be generated. It often boils down to the how do you feel and why do you feel that? That is one thing that, within our global network of 60,000 experts, not all of whom are financial analysts, certainly, but, one of the things that we really emphasize is that, particularly with the network pulse functionality that's part of the Enquire platform, that focus on your experience, focus on your recommendations based on that, depending on the prompt. But that anyone can Google things, anyone can look up the facts surrounding something. So how do you interpret that? How do you provide context to the conversation? And I do feel like that's something where Enquire in particular is well positioned to drive some of that narrative. So it's really interesting to think about that. But how do you, in terms of kind of backing it up to the business case for what that narrative means, for what the context means, do you see platforms like Enquire as being able to reduce costs for financial institutions, help enhance decision making in different ways?
Yes, when I think about what you just said there, the quality of someone's thinking is a direct function of the quality of the questions that they can ask. And the questions come from stimulus. And that stimulus can come from when you're interrogating investment research or whatever the content is, the news, whatever's out there. That's going to lead to new pathways of thought. And that's going to make you, if you're curious, it's going to make you think of new questions. And if it didn't come to mind to ask a really important question that could dramatically change your belief system around a topic, you go into the gunfight with a butter knife. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important to talk to people that have diverse perspectives. And it's not that they, you don't want to necessarily talk to people who are reading the same content that you're reading, that are talking to the same people you're talking to. What an expert network lets you do is find people who just think differently. So I think there's two things that Enquire does, I think, particularly well, is it lets you see and choose and have access to the underlying portfolio of experts. And Enquire doesn't, I don't view Enquire as having a fixed number of experts, because it will build on demand and find whatever experts it needs. So in many ways, the starting point is not the existing portfolio of experts. The starting point is, what's the question? If the question is identical or near identical to the experts that are already there and ready to go, obviously it will surface it. But there's incredible technology underneath Enquire that allows it to technologically figure out who are the right experts, reach out to them, onboard them, give them the proper training in terms of understanding what material non-public information is, give them the proper training to understand what are the compliance requirements for that conversation, particularly if it's in an investing context, but it's true almost in any context. It can onboard them all digitally. So it's one of the few purely digital expert networks, so its reach is infinite. And because it's digital and the models that are underneath it, it's not looking in the same exact places where all the other expert networks are. So back in the day when I was using other expert networks, and I used more than one, many times the same experts are, you're traversing in the same places. They're not dramatically different. Where with Enquire, it's the nature of it. Yes, it has some experts that will look familiar, as to the types of experts you might find on a different one. but I'm much more likely to be surprised as to who ends up being pulled as an opportunity for me to either talk to, reach out to in a survey format, or involve in my thought process. And I think that's something that's unique and special about Enquire. And if you end up talking to a lot of the same people everyone else is, you end up missing things. You get overly confident that because you're hearing things that are reinforcing your own beliefs, it's almost like a derivative of the confirmation bias, where many times the best questions that you're going to ask are questions that are really going to test your hypothesis, that are going to test your beliefs. Because the most important question you should always be asking is, where could I be wrong? What am I missing? And that's not going to come from talking to people that are the same people you always talk to and the same people everyone else is talking to. It's going to come from talking to people that think differently, that are looking at different information, and have a different framework that they're and different lens that they view the world. And I think that's going to come from using expert networks that are different and not alike. I'm not saying that some of the other expert networks aren't good. Some of them are excellent, and I had great experiences. The point is, you just don't want to use one expert network that tends to go and have almost like tunnel vision on a particular debate or category. And particularly depending on its size, many times it's resurfacing those same experts and sharing them with all the other people you're competing with in that debate, the other investors or whatever it is. In this case, you're going to end up finding experts that are uncommon, and that's super valuable.
It's a really good point, and it's something too where the platform Enquire does empower you to go build benches of experts that you really like. If you like their thinking on different topics, you like their insights, their access, but you can also cast a fresh line each time. And just put it out there. Let the AI pull together some of their employment experience, their geographic location, their area of expertise, and like you said, just allow yourself to be surprised by some of the things that come back, because it might be from the traditional sources that you recognize, but also ones that you would never be able to find on your own necessarily.
That's right. If you think about the network pulse that we were talking about earlier, depending on what the topic is and how important it is to you, and if you want to stay on top of how knowledge information changes over time, or you just want new stimulus, you can set those so that they reoccur. So that you can set a network pulse. It's not unlike a phone call where you set up the phone call, you have them, and you stop. Now, of course, you can set up phone calls routinely, but it's expensive and it's time consuming. Where a network pulse, you can set that to be weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever you want. It'll happen automatically. You can decide, do you want the same experts that in that pulse, or do you want to have it generate a new pulse each time? And if you're looking for original thinking and you set it to find new experts each time, you really don't know what's going to come back. And what I find many times is you end up, if I ask for half a dozen experts in the network pulse, it comes back, 4 out of the 5 tend to be saying similar things. They might be reinforcing certain structures that are underlying a given problem. Then there's usually 1 or 2 that will say something or write something that is surprising. And it triggers a thought that leads to new questions that many times will be the starting point for other analysis or other conversations. Or I may even go back, because if it's a new area and I hadn't thought about it, I may go back to the large language model and interrogate that for a while, build scaffolding and understanding around that, and then I could go back to a network pulse, or I could set up some phone calls and talk to experts, or I can talk to that expert and understand and have a deeper conversation with them because they clearly demonstrated some knowledge about something that was original. It was different than everyone else. It's not something I thought about. It's a very efficient use of my time. And many times the current state of understanding, it's dynamic. It's changing all the time. And so if you do a set of phone calls and you do your work, and now you think you understand, and then you move on, but this is an uncertainty or a debate, particularly in an investment context, that's going to continue. This network pulse allows you to stay on top of it and watch on the margin, where do we see change in the thinking? Do we see more than just one or two people saying something on the fringe, and it starts to increase in the number of people that are mentioning something? Or are we seeing more dispersion where you're getting not 4 or 5 people saying similar things? It's actually there's 2 or 3 schools of thought, and then you may want to do something more with a large statistical significance, or you may want to do other types of work. But the key to great analysis, I'll go back to, are great questions. Great questions come from really good stimulus, and good stimulus comes from diversity of perspectives. That comes from not talking to the same people that are like you. It comes from reaching out to a wide variety of people, and an expert network like an Enquire is the best way to do that.
So I'm curious, as you were being introduced to the Enquire AI platform, talking with Cenk and getting to know the product pretty well, were there any light bulb moments for you or any examples from your past, with all of the diverse corporate experience that you've had, where you could think of where, having access to a tool like that might have really helped you, had it existed at the time or had you known about it?
Yeah, I mean, so I spent a lot of my career building a platform for other people to make good decisions. So much of that was in the investment research area where I was helping my analysts. Then we ended up spinning out a business where I was helping our clients directly access the platforms that I was building. And then, later on, I was building platforms for people in other contexts. And, I think in all of those cases, I used expert networks to help me come up with ideas and insights that help me construct the platforms. But I also made expert networks part of the platforms that I was using in some cases. And, my sense is that if you were a professional and you directly had access to an expert network like Enquire, and they do have a program called Enquire Pro, where anybody can access this expert network. If you're early in your career and you're going into a meeting and you know what that meeting's about and there's senior people there, if you could access experts ahead of time and prepare yourself for that meeting so that when you went there at the right moment, you could say something that made a difference to the conversation and gave you visibility with these senior people, that level of preparation and that work that you did, you shined, you're more likely than not to get, first of all, impress them. That's likely to get you a chance to get assigned to projects that you might not normally get assigned to. If you do the same level of preparation where maybe, again, you're accessing experts, you're accessing different tools, and you're using that to do a better job, and the outcome of those projects are better, then you get a virtuous cycle that's compounding. And, performing better in meetings gets better projects get you into more meetings. That's right. You then start to impress people, and then people want you on their team. And to me, the secret to performing well, at least inside a corporate, in a corporate environment, is you need senior people who sponsor you, but not only sponsor you, they want you on their team. And if you pick the right senior people as they move up, you move up with them. And your career progresses based on your reputation, not initially when you're more junior, with some senior people who will kind of pull you up and get you out of the fray, because in a pyramid of a large hierarchy, at the bottom, it's very difficult to stand out. There are many people that look like you, and you usually don't have as much airtime in a meeting. But the better the answers to your question, the better you answer a question in a meeting, the more likely people want to hear what you have to say, or even will approach you after the meeting, and the more likely you can build a relationship that gets you access to other things. So I think it makes a lot of sense for people, depending on where they are in their career. If you're more senior and you're making big bets, you obviously want to be well prepared. But I think it's also true when you're earlier in your career, if you have access to a platform like this that prepares you better for the challenges that are ahead, you can create this cycle that you'll end up in a much better place at the end of your career than you might not have without access to it.
That's amazing. Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, it's it's all about the trajectory that you get on earlier can have a vastly different impact on where you end up. So that's great.
If you meet one person, just one person that takes a notice and gives you an opportunity, it can make an enormous difference. It really reminds me of that Eminem song where, he's talking about opportunity.
Right.
You get that one opportunity.
That's right.
And just one opportunity, and you got to seize it, right? That is his line. And I see a lot of people when they're junior, and when I was more senior, both at Morgan Stanley, UBS, different places, and I'm on boards of different things, they are unconfident and they have the knowledge or answers in their head, but they're not confident enough, or they just don't know what to say. And if you access experts ahead of time and you realize that you really are in the know and you have something to share, particularly if I said earlier that some of the best innovations come by drawing analogs from other industries. So if you talk to an expert who can give you a pathway where there's a solution to a problem that's not obvious in the industry where you are, and you then later on start to do more homework around that, and then in a meeting, because you know that meeting's on that problem, you raise your hand or you speak up, depending on what the format of the meeting is, depending on how large it is, but you speak out and you say something and it's well reasoned and it's persuasive. And people just, it's one of those moments, like almost like a drop the mic moment where people are listening to you and you're junior and they realize you are smart, you're intelligent, you have an organized mind, and you've done your homework. And if you want to propose something, they may let you go and do that. And to me, when I look at my career, I'm 56 years old right now, and I've had a long career, mostly in a corporate environment. And my career came down to certain moments where I took a personal risk and spoke out at the right time, particularly when I wasn't super known, but then showed that initiative. And that's enabled me to get projects and start this compounding that's helped me have the career that I've had. Certainly, other people have had better careers than I've had, but I've had a pretty good career. I'm very happy with how it turned out. And it was a function of risk-taking at some point in a meeting. But my approach was always to be very well prepared. I think most people would be surprised if they knew how much I would prepare for a meeting, particularly more earlier in my career when I had more time. And I didn't have children. I used that time wisely so that when I spoke up, it mattered.
So one of the things that you mentioned in our conversation before this call is that the value of sort of strategizing around that. So raising your hand when you are certain that you have the answer, preparing for the questions that you know are going to be asked. And how does a tool like an Enquire or something like that, how can that kind of fit into someone's preparation stack?
Yeah. So I think in the beginning, I would start with, particularly if there's a problem that your senior managers are grappling with that is new to your industry, or it's new to your business unit, or it could be new to your team if you're just starting out, it's often very helpful to have a conversation with an expert. But the cheapest way to have a conversation with an expert is through a large language model today. I mean, I use it every day, multiple times a day. I've used it to do everything from install very complicated network array servers in my home that I wanted to set up, and I had a lot of problems around firewalls, and I was able to get around the firewalls and get a system set up that was non-trivial alone, where before I would actually have to have a technician. When you're inside a big corporation, I would have access to lots of technicians. I'm doing a lot of things on my own now. That would not have been possible. I used it to install a safe in my wall and how you do that. And I use it all the time for all different types of things. And so don't underestimate the value of having access to a really good large language model to start off and have a conversation with an expert and help you get that kind of framework in place to then go off and spend time knowing where you want to fill in kind of the holes in what you know. But later on, I would say, in addition to that, I think the ability to efficiently go and query experts to get ideas, beyond what's available through a large language model, or to go deeper, so that when a senior manager asks, because again, what senior managers do is, if you want to appear smart in a meeting, and you can use this, you don't have to be senior. The easiest way to appear smart in a meeting is ask a hard question, right? It's way harder to answer a hard question. And so, but many times hard questions for a less informed person are highly predictable. And if you do work up front with a large language model and you prompt it properly, and you look at a problem from multiple dimensions, and you think about, where could you be wrong, like we talked about earlier. What is it that I may not know about this? And you can actually prompt the tool to help you poke holes in your understanding. And if you're interested in something, a certain topic, you can ask about that topic, but then say, people who are people who have a certain. So I'll give you an example. With Cenk, we were doing a query where he was asking about, could you tell me what the future of Turkish banking is? What the current view is on the future of Turkish banking. And I said to him, that's great. And it came back and it was a very good answer. I said, just change the prompt a little bit. What, according to people who think more positively about the future of Turkish banks, what is their current view? For people who are more negative on Turkish banks, what is the current state of their view? And then you kind of have the general view. When you looked at all three responses, his understanding about Turkish banks was radically different than just prompting it with one. So if you use the tool in a way to have to get it to expand the perspectives and how you get information, then that can be helpful. You can ask, if you're thinking about a strategy, you could say, from the lens of NVIDIA, where are the biggest opportunities in a certain type of chipset? From the perspective of AMD, where are the opportunities in that chipset? From the perspective of TSMC. And it actually will give you different answers just by saying that. I mean, if you want someone to summarize something, you could say, summarize the following text. Or you could say, summarize the following text the way Malcolm Gladwell would. Summarize the following text the way Michael Lewis would. Summarize the text the way Elon Musk might. And what you'll see is you're going to get radically different answers sometimes in the summaries. It'll pull different information. By doing that and changing the perspective and the lens, you're enriching your understanding and the possibility of an insight happening that sends you down completely different pathways. And what I usually want when I'm doing this is, yes, I want scaffolding of where I have a basic understanding of what I need to, of the context of the problem. But what I really want are great questions that can lead me down different pathways, and great questions for experts. And that can lead me to, again, depending on where I am and how important the problem is, I may want to use less expensive tools like a network pulse, or I may want to have a conversation. I may want to have the conversation and I want to track it after, and so I set up the network pulse after. And so it will be some combination of all these different tools. But I think that the platform of the future, at least from an expertise standpoint, is having multiple tools that all work together, that you can save together, and that you're able to flex what you want at the time to meet you at your level of understanding on that topic. If you only have one tool, it gets, in some cases, it can give you the wrong answers in a very expensive way. And so by having all these different things, you will ride up the experience curves much more efficiently, much more effectively. And at the end of the day, when it comes to decision making, particularly investing, but I'd say all decision making, whoever has the most accurate belief system about a topic is going to make the best decision, and they ultimately win.
That's a really good way of looking at that. That's interesting. Good. I enjoy picking your brain. There's a lot of things that you talk about in terms of like the sort of the problem solution triangulation across very seemingly completely unrelated contexts that can be really useful. And yeah, I mean, large language models can be a great way to have that initial conversation. almost to ask the stupid questions up front, so that you can ask the smart questions later and really figure out where that is, because it can apply things, and sometimes you'll get to the end of an interrogation and go, well, that's a bit of a stretch, but oftentimes you can learn something about the questions that you should be asking while you're doing that, at least.
It's funny because we're just talking about how a conversation with somebody can trigger new thoughts. And when you were just speaking, I was just thinking of another use of a large language model that's very powerful, is getting priors. So if you have to make a prediction, nobody has a crystal ball.
Right.
And so many times the best starting point is to look for something that was similar that happened in the past, at least to get some type of sense and calibration of what's happening. If you look at a large language model, just as a prior, and I've seen this chart, and maybe many others have as well, where they show the radio, then they show the TV, adoption of the radio, the adoption of TV, the adoption of the PC, the adoption of Google, the adoption of Facebook, and then you'll see the adoption of ChatGPT, where I think it's like, the first to reach 100 million users, it's measured in months, not years, and the speed with which that happened. But because you were able to, in the beginning, like, is this a big deal? Mm-hmm. Well, that's a really interesting prior. If you start to look at other innovations that have been general purpose innovations that have changed humanity, electricity, steam power, there are a whole variety of things that we can kind of, the internet, we can look at, is this a big deal? Well, something that, as one prior, that is adopted that fast, well, that's a big deal, and you're able to calibrate how fast that really is because you can compare it to other things. Now, this is an obvious one. I'm just picking it because it's obvious. But in other cases, if, let's say that there's a company and they're growing at a certain rate, and they have a product that, let's say it's a, 3D mammography company. If they're the first to come out with 3D mammography, well, it's really important to look at the rollout of 2D mammography, or the first generation of 1D mammography. And you might be able to get a sense of, is this growing fast, slow? Is it tracking? And if you look at the first year, if it's been out, or 2 years, you can start to look at that growth rate. And if it's tracking exactly like 2D mammography, well, then that's very helpful to know. And if you're going to make a prediction about the future, you must have a really good reason to believe it's 5 times faster than what's happened if it's tracking the same way. If you want to understand, the odds of a basketball team winning the NCAA tournament, you can look at, the stats as best you can and calibrate and find other teams that kind of look like them and had a certain style and whatever they're against. But look at stats from the past. How many teams have three-peated, right? So Yukon is going for their 3rd NCAA title. Is that likely? Well, yes, it's been done before. I think it was UCLA did it 3 times in a row. They're the only ones to do it, so we know it's hard. So if somebody said there's an 80% chance Yukon's going to do it again for the 3rd time, that's probably too high. They're overconfident.
Right.
If they say it's 0, well, no, the probability is not 0 because someone's done it before. Right. And you can look at the quality of their team and their recruits and what they have, and they have a very competitive team. You can look at their rankings, right? So their rankings right now, maybe they're ranked 5th. I don't know whether 3rd, 10th. I haven't looked at it. But if they're ranked in the top 10, you can look at other teams in the top 10 in the past. What are their odds of being in the finals? What are their odds of winning? That probability will inform the probability of them winning this year. The fact that they won years before, they're independent and exclusive events, it may not have an impact on this year, but you still want to calibrate and use whatever information you have. The fact that they might have gotten certain recruits, who's returning, whatever the stats are that you want to look at. And then you also want to look at and get a sense of, do those stats calibrate well with the outcome? This is where you start to use other techniques. You might use, some type of causal chain, and you start to go into more advanced statistics to allow you to reliably understand that you have a causal model that will help you calibrate the confidence you should have behind the stats that you have. And then That will only take you so far, depending on how complex the system is and problem. And then you may want to fill in the holes by talking to experts and updating your views as time goes on. In 1 month, we're going to see their record. How well did they do? How much have they beaten other teams that are of high quality? How much did they beat teams that were of medium quality? Just whatever happens, they're going to have competition, and you're going to update your views in a Bayesian sort of way. For the sake of this, we won't go into Bayesian statistics, but the idea is that you have certain views, but you're constantly updating your views with new information as it comes in. And as that new information, usually your decisions can get better over time if the quality of information being released is improving. And I think this is where expert networks can really come in as well, where it's not static. Particularly most decisions play out over time, and so you need to systematically force yourself to go out and reach out to others to help them provide new insights, new information that might be relevant to your view. So if we go all the way back, I think the large language model, which is what started this path of thought, using that to help you find people that can help you build a better base rate, a better base case, and better set of prior statistics to frame your view so that it's not in a vacuum and you're coming up with this prediction, this view, because every decision is a prediction on an outcome. It might be very reliable. You might know that if I press that button, this is going to go off, and that's pretty reliable because I've done it before and I've seen it, and it looks like other buttons like that. I can do that, but it's still a prediction about what's going to happen. It may or may not happen if that button is broken. But again, we can say that. Other ones are much more complex predictions, but everything is a prediction, and it's all going to be based off of a set of information that needs to be calibrated with priors. And don't underestimate the value of a large language model with helping you access that information, get good insights into priors to look at, and help prompt you to think about experts that you might want to reach out to who've seen this play out before, who can help you frame and calibrate your understanding, even if they're in another industry, even if they're in another context.
So before we move on completely from that, is Yukon going to three-peat?
I believe so. So one of the things that you didn't mention is I am a Yukon undergraduate alumni, and so I've been closely tracking them, and I think that they have a very good shot at doing it relative to the odds of doing that. Now, do I think the odds are 80%? No. I think it's very, very hard, and there is a lot of luck involved in addition to skill. You can just be off. If the right mix of players is off on any given night, and when the NCAA tournament's happening, you can have an off night, and the right team at the wrong time catches you, and you're out. And there is no do-overs in the NCAA tournament. So, is it 20%? Is it 15%? Is it 5%? I'm gonna have to do some homework later on. But with no priors and just my love of the team, I'm gonna put it at 20%.
Okay, that's pretty good. I mean, hey, listen, that prediction made on October 24th means a lot more than that prediction made on February 24th. So
that's right.
I like the enthusiasm, and I know it's something you've thought about. So that's good. That's good. Well, one of the things that I always think about in particularly in tech startups, that we fall in love with the technology. We love what it can do. I think AI is even unique in that regard, that it's much more conversational. But ultimately, the promise of this technology is that it can help us, connect on a more human level, and it can introduce us, as you've mentioned, to humans that you would never encounter otherwise, and find unique insights about ourselves and the things that we do and how we think and all of that wonderful stuff. So, talk about the human side of Enquire and where all of this technology is hopefully leading us in terms of the economy.
So, I think that this is an amazing tool, just like a calculator, just like a spreadsheet. It's a tool, and this tool lets us distill, synthesize, and interrogate. You've heard me use those terms over and over again, and so people's ability to distill, synthesize, and question a larger variety of content in a more meaningful way has never been greater. That being said, if we have a really important decision, it's highly unlikely that, depending on the sources of information, and if it's a decision that has a very predictable known solution, then you might go from the large language model and go do that. So when I was installing the safe or trying to fix my printer or whatever it is that I'm doing around my house, the large language model is phenomenal because there's a known solution and the stakes aren't very high. Right? If I really mess it up, I have some choices to go fix that, for me. So, but when you have a high stakes problem that is complex, you're gonna want to talk to an expert. You're gonna want to have that dialogue because it's only when you talk to an expert can you calibrate. Do they really know what they know? How confident are they? Are they hedging what they're saying? You're going to get a lot of information because 90% of communication, or whatever the stat is, but it's something like that, is nonverbal. Mm-hmm. And so that's one aspect of it, is when you're calibrating how much confidence you should have in certain beliefs, particularly if you're tapping into experts, talking to people is very helpful. The other thing is that when you have a human being, it's different than a large language model because you are doing the prompting. And because you're doing the prompting, you're limited to what you think up. And yes, you can prompt. One of your prompts could be to have the large language model give you a set of questions which you could feed back into it, but it's still following a certain pathway of thought that you're coming into that conversation with the content that you had at the very beginning. When you have a conversation with a human being, it's more unpredictable. And human beings have their own agenda. And even if they're an expert, even if you are compensating them for expertise, if they're a good expert, they're going to tell you things that are surprising. They may ask clarifying questions that trigger thoughts that they might not have had. And those clarifying questions, well, sometimes the large language models can't do that. They're going to go with what you gave. They're just statistical models finding patterns and probabilities in words to bring back other words. Mm-hmm. And a human is not like that. It's not working in exactly that same way. And to me, the very best expert, they're the ones that are going to answer the question that you didn't have enough knowledge to know to ask. Mm-hmm. And they're also able to tell you why that question is important. And the example I love to use, I have a financial advisor, and my wife is from Denmark. And when I was first meeting my financial advisor and he was meeting my wife, he said, "Look, I detect a slight accent." And my wife said, "Yes, I'm from Denmark." And he said, "Oh, wow. Just out of curiosity, are you a U.S. citizen?" And she said, "No, I'm not a U.S. citizen." He said, "Oh, we have a problem." I said, "What do you mean we have a problem?" Well, if she's not a U.S. citizen, if anything happens to you, and meaning me, everything in your estate is taxable. And because she's not a U.S. citizen, the U.S. government is worried that she's going to take your wealth and take it to Denmark. And so they make it taxable right then. And I just had kids, so we're going back 20-something years ago, 20-plus years ago, unfortunately. And he says, "Look, your biggest asset is your home. This is all taxable. And they're going to freeze your accounts. And your wife is going to have a liquidity problem. And so we need to get busy because at the time, I didn't have any estate, trust type stuff set up. Right. And she wasn't a citizen. And it led to a whole bunch of things that, for me, were very valuable. For the advisor, it's something they see all the time. And it's a pattern that they know because he's an expert. Right. For me, I didn't even know to ask the question. Right. And my advisor routinely, once or twice a year, asks me a question that I should have asked had I known, but didn't know. Could be, the Trump tax laws from back when he was president, 4 years ago, are expiring next year. Mm-hmm. Well, there's implications for certain people depending on whatever your financial situation is, and do you want to take advantage of certain things? So, there's things that I'm not tracking in my day to day or don't find personally interesting, that I have different experts I've surrounded in my life that are no different than when you're trying to make a decision. You want to surround yourself with experts who are going to ask the question that you should have asked that you didn't. And that's not going to come out of a large language model. That's going to come out of a conversation. And I love the serendipity that just happens through conversations. And I love my ability to assess and gather confidence in how knowable or not knowable certain beliefs are. And that comes through that dialogue.
That's excellent. I like that a lot. Such a good point too. And again, if you hadn't heard the accent or thought to ask, then you would still, that it may have delayed that decision at the very least. So that's good.
That's right.
So I'm curious because I know that that you've had such a progression over your career, but curious for your opinion. What is the skill set and mindset of maybe the next generation of people coming in who have done any of the many number of things that you've done? But let's focus on that analyst role. What is the skill set and mindset that they need to have in order to be successful in a world with the tools that we have and the limitless possibility for innovation that comes from here?
Yeah, so I think that the skill sets in some ways are similar to the past. There are going to be new ways to do them. So I've repeated myself, but I think the most important skill to have is the ability to ask the right questions and to have a process and a discipline that can help you formulate the right questions, or at least, I don't know if there are right questions, but a good set of questions, because if you don't ask the question, you won't get the information to then build your belief system around. And so I think question building is super important, and it's really important throughout your career. As you go deeper in your career and as you gather expertise, you're able to ask better questions because you know a lot more. You have deeper experience curves. You have a lot more to draw upon, and you've seen more. And so, and you've made a lot of mistakes. And so you at some cases, you have a sense of what doesn't work, and that intuition comes with time. So, early on, I think you want to build a skill in, figuring out what are the right questions I need to be asking myself so that I'm able to make better decisions, because again, this is all going to compound over time. You're going to be using a large language model now as part of that process. And I've seen this even with myself. Tweaking a prompt, even just in the most subtle way, produces radically different results. Mm-hmm. Or if you don't get the result that you want, understanding how to do that. And I think there are going to be new technologies that will come out over time. I mean, they already exist, but it'll be more federated, where you can build prompt chains where you ask a prompt and then there's a response, which then will trigger almost like if-then prompts to go down more. And if you have prompts you want to ask routinely, you can build more complicated, reasoning structures and that are embedded around prompts that are going to almost be like agents working for you, depending on what type of knowledge work you're doing. So you're going to build new skills in understanding how to engineer prompts, without a doubt. But those tools are going to change. So what we're seeing today, it's like Lycos in search, right? It's so new that I think these models are going to change so rapidly that the skills that we see today in using the tools are not going to be the skills you're going to need even in 5 years, because these things are morphing so fast. So, I don't want to, there's all these different consulting pieces coming out talking about how, prompt engineering and the nature of work is going to change. I wouldn't be so quick to define that just yet, but I do think it's important to get immersed with these tools, use them, figure out how to incorporate them, and try new things constantly. Mm-hmm. But that core set of question building is going to be there. I think the second piece, which is not going to change because there's so many different things that you can have access to, is having a discipline and a methodology around what matters in what you do. So if it's innovation, there are certain approaches and frameworks that really work well when you're innovating. It's important to know those frameworks, to use those frameworks, and to be disciplined around them. So on one hand, innovation people associate with creativity, and yes, you want that, but you want creativity at the right moments in the process. And at other points, being ADD and unfocused will destroy any initiative, particularly if it's in a large corporation or a startup. It doesn't matter. It's very important to be creative, but at the same time, extremely focused and disciplined. And I think the third skill that will not change is being persuasive. So, and that is inherently human. I think a large language model can help you build arguments, help you frame things. There may even be things that large language models will build and do in terms of building you assets that can be very useful in persuading. But I do believe, at least for a very long time, people make decisions or bet on, like senior people will approve bets on people that they believe know what they're doing, and they make bets on people. And so your ability to persuade people who have resources, if you're in a big corporation, it could be your senior manager, could be the board, depending on how senior you are. It could be investors if you're in a startup. But you have to be able, or if you're a leader, you want to persuade your followers to follow you into battle, to stay with you, to invest their time, to become passionate about what you're doing. And so I think that this ability to persuade, influence, sell, I don't like the word sell because sell feels very cold and it makes it seem like you're selling something that isn't real. So I like the word persuade because I like to persuade people to buy into what it is that is new. A lot of times I spent my entire career innovating. And if in order to be able to launch my innovations, I had to always convince senior managers to back me. Very easy for an idea to get killed. Very hard to get these ideas off the ground. I like to say, look, innovation is hard. Innovating in a big company is harder. It is hard because it's very political. And and those politics exist for a reason. And if you don't know how to navigate that and how to persuade, you're going to struggle. And the best way to persuade is to have bulletproof arguments that are backed with really good evidence and having answers to the difficult questions, like I said, are often predictable. And I'm surprised as a senior manager, people pitching an idea, they're so excited about their idea and the potential of it that they many times don't take the time to think about what could go wrong. What if scenarios, right? Most people think about, because humans are inherently optimistic beings, particularly innovators, well, what if there's a scenario that is different than the one that you contemplated? Mm-hmm. How will that play out? What if a competitor joins that you didn't anticipate? What if the technology changes in ways that you don't anticipate? So I use scenario thinking a lot of times, and I like framing things in that way. But I like to have a framework that's behind everything that I do, that's guiding my behavior to keep me focused on what matters. Because even for an innovator, there's a number of scarce resources. There's obviously your time. You only have so much time that you can work on different projects. So focusing increases the odds that you're moving up those experience curves. But money is scarce. Budgets are scarce. And so you want to use that money wisely. You only usually get a certain amount of runway, whether it's from a corporate manager who's allowed a project to go on before they pull the plug, or if you're in a startup and it's investors, there's only so much. They're going to want to see a certain level of progress before they commit more capital. And so if money is scarce and time is scarce, then you want to use that exceptionally wisely. And again, that's where this discipline comes in. And you want to learn what are those evergreen frameworks that are time-tested and will work. And then there's always new innovations and new thinking, and then you can adopt and test new frameworks. But there are successful ways. So I've been innovating my whole career. I think there are successful ways to do it where my track record of successful innovations has been in a corporate setting above average. And I do it in such a way where I de-risk it. And I think that's another skill that matters, which is when you're launching something, you want to do it in such a way that you are managing your risks. Entrepreneurship is not about risk taking, it's about risk management. And these disciplines of gathering information inexpensively, which we've talked about for the entire conversation, where it's still early, it's still cheap, rather than moving too quickly and making the decision where you could have gathered hidden information and you could have gotten a base rate to calibrate the amount that you want to test something, and really trying to do things in smaller steps, test and learn, iterate, and approach things in such a way that you don't take risks that are unnecessary. And then once you figure out and have those risks under control, then you can move into overdrive and scale up your ideas once they're proven. And there are different challenges when you're scaling up, but you don't want to scale up something that's not ready because you weren't disciplined, you were unfocused, and you got too excited.
Love that. It is. It's really interesting that it always comes back to emotions. Whether it's the persuasion, it's the excitement, it's all of those things that are uniquely human. That with these incredibly technical digital tools, it's always about the management of how to make very human decisions. So I also think it's interesting too that I've heard, and it makes sense when you really think about it, that all decisions are emotional, and then we backfill with data and reasoning and all of those things. But again, it's an emotional decision. It's based on how much I trust you, Barry, to what you're telling me is true. It's based on your track record. It's based on what you're saying. But ultimately, I'm going to make an emotional decision on whether I believe you or not, and feel persuaded. So
it's interesting. It's interesting you just said that all decisions are emotional. And that's true, because if you didn't have emotion, you wouldn't have motivation, you wouldn't make the decision. So it is true that at some point there's some type of emotion that's fueling you to want to make progress on something.
That's right.
That being said, if you look at these curves, and I'm sure you've seen these as well, if you go all the way back, since the beginning, since cavemen, and you look at the pace of change and innovation and progress, it's kind of this flat line, until you get to, depending on how you want to define it, the 1850s, could be 1830s to 1870s, and you start seeing it inflect, and it just, now it's like a straight line up. And what the reason why that happened, it really, I think the revolution that made all that occur, it wasn't the first industrial revolution and the steam engine. Yes, that's true, but it was really the introduction of the scientific method that changes everything and unlocks everything. Because the scientific method, it forces you, if you really follow it, and even there's a lot of research on science now, and a lot of questions about some of the research papers coming out. But if you really look at peer-reviewed research that's done properly, scientific research, and if it's following that scientific process, what it's trying to do is remove emotion from the decision-making process, where you're trying to have a hypothesis and you're actually trying to disprove your hypothesis. So when you were in stats class and they talk about the null hypothesis, the reason why the null hypothesis is important is because if you're trying to disprove your hypothesis, you seek new information. It's going to force you to set up the experiments in such a way that it's not going to confirm your view. You're going to have to think about, what is it where I could be wrong, and set up the experiments to prove the null hypothesis. Now, this is where I say there's a lot of criticism where people don't actually do it with that mindset. But I'd say, what we want to do in a perfect world is embrace the scientific method in the decisions that matter the most to us. So if you have a really, really important decision to make, you're going to have a view at some point, or you may talk to some people and you're starting to form a view over time as you move up your learning curve. But once you have your view, that's going to be supported by a belief system. And you have premise, conclusion. So there's certain premise. Those premises are beliefs. They're backed by beliefs. You're then going to want to, look for evidence to support those beliefs. But you're actually not going to want to look for evidence to support the beliefs. You're going to want to look for evidence to refute the beliefs, and we just don't do it. And so I think if you want to be a better decision maker, you don't have to set up everything, like you're a PhD scientist and we're trying to get through FDA approval, but you can take the spirit and ethos of the scientific method. And even, like I said, when you're prompting a large language model or when you're talking to an expert, focus on the null hypothesis. Focus on where you could be wrong. What's the alternative point of view? And spend time on the alternative points of view and really think about what evidence would they need? What would they need to believe? What evidence would they need to back up that view? What is that evidence suggesting? And just by looking at it and spending time on it, what the research says, you will then become much more sensitive to when you start to see that information in the outside world. If you just focus on your view and collecting information to support your view because you're so focused on the persuasion element, you could end up subconsciously or unconsciously inhibiting your ability to make good decisions or change your decision over time when the evidence is no longer supporting it. So there's this tension between wanting to be persuasive and gather information to convince people to follow you or back you, but at the same token, you don't want to be fooled by your own story, your own narrative there, and you want to include your senior managers or your investors, in your journey. So when you're setting up experiments to test an idea or really to refute the idea, and you explain to them, look, we have these experiments that we're setting up, and when new information comes out on those experiments, share them with your senior manager. And even if they didn't work, say, look, we did these tests, and you want to do this as inexpensively, as quickly as you can. So you're not using a lot of time, you're not using a lot of money. Once you gather that evidence, if it's not supporting your view, then you might want to test other things. And as a senior manager, when I see somebody who's not wedded to their view, they're smart, they've done their homework, but they've done these tests in low-cost ways to quickly, and they're saying, look, this is not what we were expecting to see. So therefore, this is what we're going to test next. This is how we're morphing our idea. As long as it's not expensive and time-consuming and distracting, then it's impressive to a senior manager. I had a situation many years ago where I was building something and I was doing certain tests and they were coming back favorably. And the manager wanted to give me double-digit millions of dollars to get behind my idea. And I said, no, I don't want your money. You don't want to give me your money. Not now, because we have more work. We have more things that need to be tested to know if at least enough of the idea to get it into a workflow in some form of a true solution. There were more pieces that needed to come together. So I told the senior manager, I don't want your money. My goal is to spend your money as inexpensively as I can, and I want to keep it safe. And so I really appreciate the backing. But these are the next experiments that we had. And I just had a regular dialogue with this senior manager. And I eventually ended up spending, with one of these ideas, close to triple-digit millions, right? It was a very large idea. But it started slow. It was safe. And I think the managers and the way I was interacting with the managers, they felt confident with me because they saw the way that I was approaching it and that I understood and managed the risks. And there's the old Rumsfeld. There's known knowns. There's kind of the unknown knowns, and then there's the unknown unknowns, right? And so you need to get out there. There's no product, no idea, nothing innovative, truly innovative that I've ever worked on that once I got it out into the field, that I didn't learn that it was off in certain ways. Mm-hmm. And so the goal is to find that out as cheaply and inexpensively as possible, and to bring your senior managers along with your process. And so if you stay disciplined and you have these methodologies to follow, you build trust in the team, you build trust in you as a manager, as an innovator, particularly if you're in a big company, but it's also true if you're even in a startup. And discipline coupled with creativity coupled with risk management all comes from asking the right questions, which was kind of where we began. And I think these are all skills that we've always had. We're just going to have a whole set of new tools and new techniques to be able to do a better job at all of them.
That's brilliant. Yeah. Yeah. Such an interesting part of actually bringing something, into the marketplace in some way or another is that you find out what it actually does, because what it does is what people use it for. So it can be such an interesting part of that process. So really appreciate your insights. I have a feeling I could talk to you all day about this stuff and pick your brain on different examples. But just wanted to zoom back out, particularly as it relates to this digital expert network that we're working on together here, and you've been in those meetings and a very high level with Enquire right now. I'm just curious, the things that make you want to get involved, that sort of light your fire based on the experience that you have and where you see things going. What are the things that really excite you about Enquire right now, and maybe some of the future developments that are being discussed?
Yes. One of the things I like about Enquire was it was built from the very beginning as a digital expert network. So everything, all of it, the platform was conceived of as being straight through processing, purely digital. Now, that mindset allows expertise to be acquired inexpensively. And there are many times where, again, there are many very good expert networks out there, but there are many times where I have questions, I need knowledge, and I don't want to spend thousands of dollars on a set of phone calls, or I'm not ready to spend thousands of dollars on a phone call, or I don't want to waste a lot of time on a phone call where I didn't really know, I didn't have the set of questions bedded down yet to have a really good conversation yet. And it was a very expensive way to kind of get up to speed. So what I like about Enquire is it follows the entire continuum of learning. It meets me where I am at my stage of learning. And in some cases, I have deep expertise in certain topics. In other areas, I'm a complete newbie. And so in the beginning, when I just want to get up to speed and I want to use a large language model and interrogate that chat experience to get up to speed, I've had a wonderful experience with Enquire, because Enquire is not using one large language model. It has access to multiple. And the way that it's engineered, it's not going to give you responses exactly the same way that OpenAI would, or Gemini, or Claude. It's leveraging all of them, but Enquire has an advantage because it's the use of it. It's really around decision making, and it's around trying to learn from experts. It's a little bit narrower. So the way that they've tuned the large language models and have tuned the way the responses come back, and it's allowed it to give a very different experience than I'm able to get on anything else. So I go to Enquire as my go-to chat experience, not because I think Enquire makes a better large language model than Anthropic or OpenAI or any of these different players, Google. I don't have to. I'm tapping into all of those. But the engineering behind it has calibrated in such a way that I get better answers to the types of questions that I need when I'm looking to get up to speed on something, or when I need to make a decision on something. There are other cases where ChatGPT or Gemini are just perfectly fine, and I'll use that and it's convenient. But when I'm trying to get up to speed and I want to learn something of substance, it's important for me to use Enquire, because at the end of that experience, not only do I get different answers, it shows me the experts. Mm-hmm. And I can then go from and look at those experts and decide, do I want to then graduate? And am I ready for a more complex set of questions that, again, for me, it's the network pulse is usually next. And I like to send that out because it's relatively inexpensive, and I get thoughtful answers back. And then I can also get a way to see how different people think And from that, I can choose people to then get on an expert call with, or I can decide to get different people, but use what I learned there, and I can go down different paths depending on how I feel and what I need to know on that topic. But Enquire is the only expert network, at least that I've come across, that follows the complete continuum of where I am in my learning process. And that makes it unique. And I think it's only getting better. Every single day, it gets better and better. Not only does it feed certain content back through it so that it gets better, but they're changing the engineering constantly and tuning the prompts, and they're in constant dialogue with professionals who are using it for a particular purpose. If you're working at one of these places like Google on Gemini, the potential use cases are extremely wide. So you have to accommodate a lot of different things, a lot of different purposes. When you're in a domain, it gives you the luxury of doing embeddings and doing different types of prompt engineering techniques and building different chains that are extremely supportive to the task at hand. And so to me, that's what I'm most excited about is I'm watching Enquire evolve and get better every single day. And I'd say the thing I'm most excited about, and this is hopefully going to get launched in December, January. Cenk may make us take this out. But there's been a huge focus on redesigning the experience to simplify it and make it simple. Because you shouldn't have to think. In a perfect world, if you're an expert and I'm trying to get up to speed, I can ask you any question I want. I can interrupt you. I can move the conversation where I want. I can go back to something that I didn't understand. I'm in control. And after a very short amount of time, I can achieve flow. Like I'm just the expert, you and me, we're melding together, and there's a flow to the conversation. There's a flow to how I'm learning it, particularly if it's a good expert. I just really feel like everything's come together, and it was just such a great use of time. And I know so much more after the call than before the call. But if you have to think about how to operate and move stuff, and there's a lot of different things that you can do, it breaks the flow. Mm-hmm. And so what I love about Enquire, the new design, is it's simple. And it anticipates what people are going to want to do, because Enquire spent a lot of time working with the people who are using it, actively, and rebuilding that experience. Because, when Enquire was first formed, obviously large language models didn't exist. The network pulse was conceived of early, but the way that the different functionality that they wrapped around that, as different types of ideas came about and different requests came from users, it got more complex over time. And the same thing is true with even the ability to manage projects. All of that, they've taken a clean sheet of paper, they've started with new users, and it's so much better. What I've seen so far, it's so much better, so much easier, and it will allow people, and because I get a sneak preview because I'm an advisor, it's going to allow people to achieve flow in such a way where they won't be distracted about how do I do different things. It's what do I want to do? What am I learning? And even what have I learned in the past that I want to go back to? It'll be so easier to find stuff and make use of the investments people have made, both with time and with their budget, compared to when you do these expert calls. Many times, the end product is whatever the notes that you took, or you might get a summary of the call yourself. But that's not what's envisioned for Enquire. It's going to be something that's much more comprehensive, but simple. So to me, the future is extremely exciting. And I think Enquire, the Enquire that we see in January, February is going to be a big leap forward from what we see today. But I have no doubt that the Enquire that we see by the summer is going to change again. And the Enquire that we see, by next year at this time, it's going to change again. Now, it's going to have a framework where I think now they're learning about how people want to consume knowledge that will be stable. But I think what's underneath the scenes and kind of how people are leveraging all these changes in models, I think Enquire will grow with that. And I think that the other mindset I love about Enquire, which is connected to this thought, is as they're engineering, because they're digital first, their goal is to make knowledge acquisition as inexpensive as possible. That's not always the goal of some of the other expert networks. And so Enquire is very willing to cannibalize certain aspects of its value proposition because they have a profound belief that if you serve the customer well, that's going to be that's what's going to create the longest lifetime value. And I think that a lot of this investment is going into helping people acquire knowledge extremely inexpensively and allow for the reuse and sharing of that knowledge. So I'm excited about the future.
I love it, Barry. You've been very generous with your time, and you're a mensch. I really appreciate it. Like I said, I could talk to you all day, but I know you got to go. I hear my little ones coming in behind me, so we'll leave it there. But really appreciate it, and would love to follow up with you more, particularly as as Enquire does start to make some of those leaps and bounds. With its interface, with its functionality, with different things like that. Would love to check in with you more often.
Sure, it'd be my pleasure.